Hey, everybody. So, since it's Thanksgiving week, I decided I wanted to take a break from some of the political stuff and make a couple of videos that'll just help newcomers to this channel know a little bit more about who I am and what this channel is about. And I hope this video today tells you some more about myself, but I really hope it helps you to understand pastors a little bit better. Tomorrow, I'm going to answer a question that people might think is the same as today's question, but it's really not. Tomorrow, I'm going to answer the question, why don't I call myself a pastor on this channel? I refer to myself as a retired pastor sometimes because I think it's important that people know that's the experience that I have that I'm bringing to the table. But I intentionally don't use the title of pastor anymore. And I have an important reason for why I do that. And that one I want to explain in its own video tomorrow. But for today, I'm going to answer a related question, which is, why did I retire from pastoral ministry in 2016? I get asked that a lot. I was 50 years old when I retired. So it's a really understandable question. And I think the answer will help people understand a little bit better where I'm coming from. The short answer is that I always planned to retire from ministry at around 50 years old. I've never felt that I had the right set of gifts to care for a church as I got older. So I have two reasons that I want to focus on today for why I retired as a pastor. One is all about my just specific emotional makeup, and the other one is about the way that I think. I felt called to plant a specific church in St. Paul years ago, and I spent many years preparing for that. And so in preparation for that, I helped to start a church in Minneapolis while I was in seminary, and I served as the pastor of worship at that church for 6 years. And then the final year that I was at that church, my main job was to put together a team to plant a church in my own neighborhood in St. Paul. So my wife and I and a group of friends started our church in St. Paul in 2002. And I led that church until I retired in 2016. And that was really one of the most fruitful times of my life. But I always knew that my calling was never to be a pastor forever. So first, the emotional reason for why I retired. Emotionally, I just have a certain type of personality that doesn't lend itself to balancing, hundreds of relationships. It's always been easiest for me to just use some kind of shorthand when I explain that and say that I'm an introvert. And that's definitely true. I'm a serious introvert, which means that when I spend significant time with people, I have to go home and just crash afterwards. But it's more than just introversion. If you know anything about, for instance, this old personality inventory, the Myers-Briggs personality inventory, I'm what they call an INTP on that inventory, which all you need to know about that is it's your absent-minded professor kind of person. Like, that's pretty much me. And so I'm most comfortable when I'm in my own head, when I'm thinking about things that I want to think about, and then I'm kind of synthesizing that stuff and writing it down to share it with other people. But I'm not real good at talking with people long term and applying those things into their day-to-day lives. To me, that's what pastoring is about. It's about caring for the needs of people on a day-to-day basis, not just preaching and teaching. And I've just never been able to carry that responsibility super well. I've got tons of admiration for people who have that gift of caring for people and leading them through like the ups and downs of life. And I did that for 20 years, but it's not exactly how I'm shaped. I'm sharing this partly because I think it might help my listeners to understand your own pastors better too. I spent thousands of hours meeting with people in 20 years of ministry, and I don't think I was bad at giving advice or applying the scriptures into people's lives, but I was bad at caring for myself in that process. One of the weaknesses of being sort of an absent-minded professor type is that I'm not as emotionally intelligent as I'd like to be. Like, just for instance, I'm not cutting myself down either. We're all shaped in certain ways, So I have a friend named Mike, who was my assistant pastor for years. And he had this gift that I never had. You might know people like this. Like, we'd both be in a church meeting together, and I'd come out of it and I'd be thinking about like the ideas that we discussed. But Mike would say things like, did you notice how sad, I'm making these names up, did you notice how sad Daisy was in that meeting? No, I didn't notice that, or did you see the way that Larry's ears perked up when you were talking about such and such a thing? And that stuff was mostly invisible to me. It's not that I couldn't empathize with people. I mean, I worked at it really hard because I cared deeply about people. But empathy came naturally to someone like Mike, and for a bunch of other people that I know, it's just intuitive for them. But for me, empathy is more like a second order response. I get there through thinking about it rather than just feeling what people are feeling. And so when you're doing that process all the time of like trying to understand where someone's coming from and thinking about it to get to what they're feeling, it can be kind of exhausting for decades, So I know a lot of my parishioners probably would describe me as like empathetic, but that's because I was just working at it all the time. I cared deeply about it, and it just wasn't a skill that came naturally to me. But a related thing that happens for someone with that personality type is that even when we understand someone else's emotions, we're not very good at knowing what to do with them. So I think people with a pastoral gift have an ability not just to help someone where they're at emotionally, but then to handle those emotions in a healthy way themselves. And what I mean is this, like if you're a pastor or a therapist or in some sort of related sort of work, you just hear an awful lot of painful things on a daily basis. And what do you do with that? In my case, the thing that saved me actually and allowed me to do pastoral ministry for 20 years is I had some really good mentors, and especially Ned, who mentored me through the last 15 years of my ministry. I'd meet with Ned once a week, and he just listened to me and he'd give me perspective. And I've said that he saved my ministry several times just by being there to help me process things. So he helped me to shore up my weaknesses in that area, but I never mastered that thing that I think people with a real pastoral gift tend to be good at. The way I describe it to people is that when someone would meet with me, they'd take this weight that they've been carrying and they'd pass it on to me, their pastor. And that's appropriate. Like, I wanted to take that weight from them. But the part that I never got real good at was to take that weight from inside me and give it to Jesus. And believe me, I tried. But no matter how much I prayed for Jesus to take these burdens, I never got good at completely releasing that weight. Some of it kind of always stayed with me. And I remember in the later years, I told people that I felt like I'd become the church's liver, that I was filtering out the poisons and the impurities in the church, but I was absorbing them into myself. And after a while, that's just not a healthy place to be. So since just given my personality type, I just knew that my days as a pastor were kind of numbered. I was called to plant that church, and I'm happy that I did, but I knew that just dispositionally I was kind of wearing out because of just the way that I'm shaped. And so that brings me to the second reason that I retired when I did, and that's all about how I think. And that one's easier to talk about in a way, and it answers a question that you might have already been asking yourself as I shared this first thing. You might have been saying to yourself, well, why not just pastor a larger church where your responsibilities are just preaching and teaching and get someone else to do the day-to-day care of your congregation? And that makes sense. A lot of people do that. But as it turns out, that's also not a good fit for me because of the way that I think. I made a video a couple years ago explaining this to people. I called it "The Phrase That Led Me to Retire as a Pastor." I told the story in that video of a retreat that I went to with a small group of church leaders. And this retreat happened when I was sort of in the middle of deciding whether or not it was the right time for me to retire. Like, I was starting to feel that the time had come, that I was maybe just a little bit misplaced as a pastor of a church. I still believed the things I was saying, but I was starting to wonder if I was the right person to be saying those things. So we were in the middle of a conversation about who knows what. And this guy said something that just kind of set my brain on fire. And it was pretty much all I heard the rest of that night. It was actually, believe it or not, it was only half of a sentence. But I still remember the half of a sentence that he said. The first half of the sentence, I don't know what it was. But then he said this. He said, understanding that some of us are called to define the orthodox core of the universe, while others are called to explore out to the edges and report back on what they find. So I'll say that again. Understanding that some of us are called to define the orthodox core of the universe, while others are called to explore out to the edges and report back on what they find. And when he said that, I realized that my days as a teaching pastor were numbered, and I started planning my eventual retirement that night. I knew I no longer had any interest in being the person who defines the orthodox core of the universe for people. Like, we need people like that. We need people who are willing to do this work of laying out, systematic theology to help us, keep us on the rails. But that's not the way my brain works. I'm someone who asks a lot of questions. I'm somebody who shakes things up. I'm not the person you want laying down boundaries. So I'm the one you want exploring out at the edges and reporting back. So that one phrase, I think, summed me up, and it freed me to be the person that I've become since then. So even this channel is a response to the message that I heard that night. One of the frustrating things for me about the Trump years is that I feel called to spend so much time focusing on some things that aren't very happy. But I do recognize that this is where my specific gifting can be helpful right now. Too many church leaders, I think, have wrongly defined the orthodox core of the universe. They've built a system that somehow led to 81%, for instance, of white evangelicals to support a corrupt sociopath for president. So we need people helping us to think differently. We need people to help us break out of the false and pathological orthodoxies that the evangelical church in America has created for itself. And so that's where I find myself today. I'm outside of those boundaries, and I'm a lot happier for it. I'll never call myself an evangelical again, but it's not because I've been cast out. I think it's Gandalf that said, "Not all who wander are lost." I left willingly, and I'm enjoying my explorations. And this channel is my attempt at reporting back a little bit of what I'm finding. And to the extent that you feel like coming along, welcome to the journey, and thanks for listening.